A boy abandoned by his own parents when he was just a child. For 12 long years, nobody knew where he went or how he survived. But one day he returned. Not alone, but with his old nanny. And what he did next left his parents, neighbors, and the entire town in disbelief. This is a story of rejection, resilience, and shocking revenge, but also a twist no one saw coming. He was only a boy when his parents decided they wanted nothing more to do with him. No warnings, no explanations, just the brutal sting of rejection. On a cold evening, with nothing but a small bag of clothes and eyes full of tears, he was left outside their grand iron gates. Neighbors whispered as they watched the scene unfold, but nobody dared to intervene. After all, these were powerful people, and when they made a decision, no one questioned it. The boy stood there trembling, clutching the bag that felt heavier with every second. His parents didn't even look back. The door slammed shut, and for him, childhood ended in that single moment. He wanted to scream, to beg for just one more chance to be loved, but his voice was swallowed by the night. What no one knew was that this wasn't an accident. His parents believed he would never amount to anything, that he was a burden, a disgrace to their image. In their eyes, he was a mistake to be erased. And so they erased him. But fate had other plans. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, the boy wandered through the world like a ghost. He slept under bridges, scavenged for food in markets, and sometimes went for days without speaking to another soul. Yet through all the suffering, he held on to one burning thought. One day, I will return. One day, they will see who I've become. The fire inside him grew with every struggle. His only companion in those early years was a woman who had once cared for him, a nanny who refused to forget the child she had loved like her own. Though she had been dismissed by his parents long ago, her heart never let go. Against all odds, she found him. And when she did, she became his shield, his teacher, his family. Under her care, the boy transformed. He was no longer the fragile child abandoned on the street. She taught him discipline, resilience, and the kind of strength that isn't written in books but carved into the soul through pain. Every lesson she gave him was a seed, and over the years, those seeds grew into something unstoppable. But make no mistake, he never forgot. Every hardship, every humiliation, every tear in the night, it all fueled the promise he made as a child. I will come back. And when I do, the world will remember my name. 12 years passed. 12 long, grueling years of building himself from the ground up. The boy had turned into a man. No one could have recognized the frail figure that once stood outside those gates. He carried himself with an air of quiet authority now, the kind that made people step aside without him saying a word. His nanny, older but still standing proudly by his side, remained his anchor, reminding him of the path he had taken. When he finally decided to return, it wasn't out of anger. No. It was something far more powerful. He returned because the time had come to reveal what those who cast him aside had truly created. Not a weak child, but a man forged in fire. The day of his return was unlike any other. The town buzzed with whispers as a sleek black car rolled slowly down the familiar streets. Windows opened, people leaned out, curious eyes followed every move. Who was this figure emerging from the car? Dressed in tailored perfection, every step he took radiated control. And right beside him, walking with a gentle yet commanding grace, was his nanny, the woman who had refused to abandon him when the rest of the world did. The crowd couldn't believe their eyes. Could this truly be the same boy? The one everyone had pitted, mocked, and forgotten? And then, as the gates of his parents' house loomed once more, something extraordinary happened. The doors that once slammed shut on him were opened wide by the very guards who once pushed him away. They bowed as he entered. The same neighbors who had whispered years ago now stood frozen, unable to speak. Inside, his parents waited. Their hair was grayer now, their faces marked by time, but their pride was untouched. They thought they had buried their past mistake forever. But here he was, alive, thriving, untouchable. The silence in the room was suffocating. His father's voice trembled as he tried to speak. His mother's eyes flickered with disbelief. But before they could utter a single word, he raised his hand. The gesture was calm, but it carried the weight of years of silence, pain, and unspoken truth. He looked at them, not with anger, but with a depth of control that made their knees weak. They expected hatred, revenge, maybe even tears. But what came next was far worse, because he hadn't returned for their forgiveness. He hadn't come back to cry or to beg. He came back to show them the consequences of their choice. He came back to prove that the child they had thrown away had become a man they could never ignore. And as his nanny stood beside him, her eyes glistening with both pride and sorrow, it became clear to everyone watching, this was no ordinary homecoming. This was a reckoning. The air was thick with suspense. The neighbors pressed against their windows, and even the staff inside the house couldn't look away. Everyone was waiting for his next move. And when he finally opened his mouth to speak, the entire room held its breath. What he said in that moment would change everything. The silence stretched, heavy and unbearable, as every eye remained locked on him. For a long moment, he said nothing, only letting the tension build. His parents shifted uneasily in their seats, their pride fighting against the fear that was slowly creeping into their veins. They expected shouting, they expected accusations, but the man before them radiated something far more terrifying: control. Finally, he spoke. His voice was calm, measured, yet carried an authority that silenced even the ticking of the clock on the wall. 12 years ago, he began, you made a choice. You erased me. You left me to disappear into the world as if I was nothing. But tell me, does nothing look like this now? His words hit like thunder. Gasps spread across the hall where distant relatives and household staff had quietly gathered to witness the return. His parents stared at him, unable to form a reply. His father's jaw clenched, his mother's hands trembled slightly on her lap. The nanny stood beside him like a pillar, her expression soft but her pride unmistakable. She had raised this boy into the man who now commanded the very room that once rejected him. She didn't need to speak. Her presence alone was a reminder of what real loyalty looked like. He walked across the hall, every step deliberate, every glance piercing. His father tried to reclaim control, forcing a smile that looked more like a grimace. You've done well for yourself, clearly, he muttered, his voice brittle. But why come back? After all these years, what is it you want? The young man turned, his eyes locking with his father's. There was no anger, no hatred, just a dangerous calm. What I want, he said slowly, is something you never gave me. Not love, not shelter, not even recognition. What I want is the truth. The room froze. His mother's face paled. The neighbors outside leaned closer to their windows, desperate to hear. The staff standing along the walls exchanged nervous glances. What truth? What could possibly be hidden behind the decision to abandon a child? But he didn't let them answer right away. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping lower. You didn't throw me out because I was a burden. You didn't erase me because you couldn't afford me. No, you erased me because you feared me. Isn't that right? His father's mask slipped. For the first time, fear flashed in his eyes. His mother looked away, as though the truth might burn her if she met his gaze. The air grew colder, heavier, as every second ticked by without a response. The young man straightened, a faint smile touching his lips. You see, he continued, I've spent 12 years wondering why. Why your son was less worthy of your love. Why I was the one cast aside while the world believed you to be noble, respectable, untouchable. But now, he paused, letting the silence crawl through the room like a shadow. Now I know. You feared what I would become. And you were right to fear it. The words struck like lightning. Gasps echoed once more. His nanny's eyes shone, proud but pained, for she knew the weight of those years on his shoulders. His father gripped the armrest of his chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. His mother whispered something under her breath, but no one could make out the words. And then, without warning, the young man turned to the staff. Do you remember me? He asked. The The maids and butlers shifted nervously, some nodding, others unable to meet his gaze. He looked at one of them directly, an older servant who had been with the family for decades. "Tell them," he commanded. "Tell everyone what you saw that night." The servant hesitated, trembling, torn between loyalty and the unbearable truth. Finally, with a voice barely above a whisper, he said, "They didn't cast you out because of weakness. They cast you out because they believed you would one day surpass them. They said you were dangerous, not to others but to their pride, their name. They feared the world would choose you over them." The hall erupted in murmurs. Neighbors outside clutched their chests in disbelief. The story they had been told for years, that the boy had been unworthy, troublesome, impossible, was nothing but a lie. The truth was far darker. His parents hadn't abandoned him out of disappointment. They had abandoned him out of fear. The young man's eyes never left his parents. "So it's true," he whispered. "You feared me. You feared the very child you created. And you thought by casting me out, you could erase me. But instead, you created something greater than you could ever imagine." His father rose suddenly, his voice breaking with desperation. "We did what we had to do. You don't understand the pressure, the expectations, the image we had to protect. We couldn't risk everything we built for a boy who," he stopped himself, but it was too late. The words hung in the air like poison. The young man's smile faded. His tone sharpened, cutting through the room like a blade. "For a boy who what? Who threatened your legacy. Who might grow to outshine you. Who might remind the world that greatness cannot be contained by your walls." He shook his head slowly. "You thought you buried me, but you planted me instead." The crowd was stunned. The neighbors outside whispered frantically. Every eye in the room was locked on him, waiting for what he would do next. He turned to his nanny then, his expression softening just for a moment. She placed a hand gently on his arm, grounding him, reminding him of the strength he carried not just from pain, but from love. With a nod, he faced his parents once more. "You wanted me gone," he said, his voice rising, resonating through every corner of the house. "But here I stand, not to beg for your approval, not to seek your forgiveness. I stand here to remind you, and everyone watching, that the child you abandoned became the man you could never control." The hall thundered with murmurs. The neighbors outside gasped loudly, and his parents sat frozen in their seats. For the first time in their lives, they were powerless, stripped of their image, their pride shattered. And just when it seemed the storm had passed, he dropped the final blow. He leaned closer, his eyes burning with quiet fire, and said, "This is only the beginning." The room fell into complete silence. The neighbors clutched at one another, whispering frantically about what could possibly come next. His parents sat pale and shaken, their empire of pride cracking before their very eyes. The reckoning had begun. The words, "This is only the beginning," echoed like thunder in the silence of that grand hall. No one dared to breathe. No one dared to move. His parents sat frozen, their empire of pride crumbling before their very eyes. The neighbors outside pressed even closer to their windows, unable to tear themselves away from the unfolding spectacle. Everyone wanted to know, what could possibly come next? The young man stepped forward, his presence filling the room like a storm. He didn't need to raise his voice. The weight of his calm was louder than any scream. "For years, you hid behind wealth, behind power, behind reputation. You believed your name could shield you from the truth. But today, that shield shatters. Because I am no longer the child you abandoned. I am the man who stands before you, and I will make sure the world sees you for who you truly are." His mother's lips trembled. "Please," she whispered, "don't destroy us. We were wrong, but we're still your parents." The words might have softened another man's heart, but not his. He turned to her slowly, his gaze sharp yet steady. "Parents," he repeated, "parents protect. Parents sacrifice. Parents never abandon their child to the cold. You chose your pride over me. You chose silence over love. You chose to erase me. From that moment, you ceased to be my parents." The truth struck like a blade. Tears welled in her eyes, but he didn't falter. He turned his attention to his father, the man who once believed himself untouchable. And you, the great man, the respected figure. What respect do you deserve now, when the world learns you abandoned your own blood because you feared being overshadowed? His father tried to stand tall, but his shoulders sank under the weight of shame. He opened his mouth to defend himself, but no words came out. The silence was deafening. The young man's voice hardened. Do you know what pain feels like? Do you know what it means to wake up every day wondering why you were never enough? I do. For 12 years, I carried that pain like a shadow. And every night, I told myself one thing: I will rise, and they will see me again. Not because I need them, but because they need to be reminded of the truth they tried to bury. The staff in the room shifted, some nodding subtly, unable to hide their agreement. The neighbors outside clutched their chests, whispering feverishly. This was no longer just a family confrontation. This was a story of justice, of survival, of revenge written in silence and endurance. And then, without warning, the young man turned to the very people who had once whispered about him, the neighbors, the community who had watched him suffer and done nothing. He raised his voice so they too could hear through the open windows. You watched me leave. You saw me standing outside those gates, alone, broken, and you did nothing. You whispered about me like I was a curse. But today you whisper for another reason. Today, you whisper because you see what I have become. The crowd outside bowed their heads, guilt washing over their faces. They knew he was right. They had judged him without knowing, turned their backs when he needed them most. And now, he stood taller than any of them could have imagined. His nanny, standing by his side, finally spoke. Her voice was soft but carried the weight of truth. I raised him with nothing but love and faith. I told him every night, you are not weak, you are not forgotten. And he believed me. Look at him now. This is the boy you left to die, and this is the man he became. Her words brought tears to many eyes. Even those who had never known the boy personally felt the sting of guilt. The staff wept silently. The neighbors whispered prayers under their breath. The young man placed a hand gently on his nanny's shoulder, his expression softening only for her. Then he looked back at his parents, his gaze sharp once more. Do you see? The love you refused me, she gave freely. The family you denied me, she built with her bare hands. The man I am today, every ounce of strength, every victory, every breath of resilience, I owe not to you, but to her. And that is the truth you can never erase. His father collapsed back into his chair, his face buried in his hands. His mother sobbed silently, unable to bear the weight of his words. For the first time, they were stripped of everything: their lies, their pride, their illusion of power. But he wasn't done. He walked to the center of the hall, his voice ringing out like a verdict. 12 years ago, you threw me away because you believed I would amount to nothing. You thought the world would forget me. But now, the world will never forget what you did. Because I will make sure my story is heard. Not to seek pity, not to gain sympathy, but to show that even the darkest rejection can create the brightest fire. The neighbors outside erupted into murmurs of awe. The staff clapped their hands to their mouths in disbelief. The hall was alive with tension, with energy, with the undeniable truth that history was being rewritten right before their eyes. The young man stepped closer to his parents one final time. His tone softened, but his words carried the final strike. You will live the rest of your days knowing that the boy you abandoned became the man you can never claim. I don't need your name. I don't need your approval. And I will never need your love, because I found something greater: freedom. He turned then, his coat brushing lightly as he moved toward the doors. His nanny followed, her step steady, her heart full of pride. The staff parted to let him pass, their eyes wide with respect. The neighbors outside watched as he emerged once more from the gates, but this time, he wasn't the boy being cast out. He was the man who had returned to claim his destiny. The car door opened, and before stepping inside, he paused for just a moment. He looked back, not at his parents, but at the house itself, the symbol of all the pain he had endured. His lips curved into a faint smile, not of joy, not of revenge, but of triumph. Then he entered the car. The engine roared to life. As it pulled away, whispers spread through the town like wildfire. They all knew the truth now. The story of the boy who had been cast out, the boy who had returned with strength, the boy who had transformed into a man none could ever ignore. And though his parents remained trapped in the ruins of their pride, he was free. Free to live, free to rise, free to continue the journey that had only just begun. The world had tried to erase him, but instead, it had written his name in fire. And this time, no one would ever forget.